Whatever happened to the future? Have you noticed that the future has gone away? This, I think, is the most striking thing about our politics today, whether it's America or Europe or much of the rest of the world, that there's no future anymore. For the past couple hundred years, from the French Revolution forward, what democratic politics has generally been about is the future. We've been very good at producing different competing versions about what the future would be. And then democracy was about precisely deciding which of these versions of the future would come about. If there's one thing I think that's essential to, which is most characteristic of the problem of democracy today, it's that the future is gone. If we don't have a sense of the future, if we don't have various ideas about what might be coming and which of these versions is better, it's very hard for people to feel involved. It's very hard for people to feel that they should vote. Democracy in that sense needs the future. But interestingly, the connection's deeper. Democracy also produces the future, because if you believe that your vote matters, if you believe your participation matters, if you believe that the little things you do have consequences, then you're also in your own mind, and even in politics and society, you're creating the future. So there's a relationship, a back and forth between democracy and the future. And what I'd like to suggest today is that if we want our democracy back, or if we want our democracy to work, we have to start by thinking about the future, thinking our way into the future, and thinking about how to bring the future back into politics. Where does the trouble begin? The trouble begins, I think, not with the various dictators and authoritarians who we have now. The problem begins about a generation ago. It begins in 1989. It begins with the idea that history is over, or that there are no alternatives. This view of the world, the idea that only one thing is really possible and that thing is good and that thing is going to come about automatically, is what I think of as the politics of inevitability. The politics of inevitability says there are things in the world and they're going to mechanically, automatically bring about other good things in the world. So, for example, capitalism is good. It's going to automatically bring about democracy. Or technology is good, it's going to automatically make us all more enlightened. In this story from the 1990s, early 2000s maybe, we come to the conclusion that everyone is going to become more like us, we're going to become more like ourselves, democracy is simply inevitable. The people who held this view thought of themselves as realists. This is the way the world really is. Nothing else can really happen. The odd thing about this form of realism is that it leaves aside entirely reality. That is, it leaves aside the natural world, because 1989, after all, was also the time, and I'll come back to why this is so important, is also the time when it became clear that something like global warming was happening. So, the politics of inevitability has now crashed. We are now, all of us, again, whether it's America or Europe or much of the world, into something else. Clearly, people no longer believe that democracy is inevitable. In general, democracy is losing here and elsewhere. People feel that they can make arguments against democracy and win elections that way, and that's actually happening. The kind of timelessness, this dread moment that we have now where no one can really talk about the future, where everyone is at everyone else's throats, where we're kind of stuck in a present of us and them all the time, is what I call the politics of eternity. Where do we get to the politics of eternity? We get to the politics of eternity because the politics of inevitability is wrong. The politics of inevitability says capitalism is good. Capitalism is good for many things, but if you just let it on its own, you're going to get dramatic inequality as you have in the US and Britain, and that will make people dissatisfied and lead them to vote in ways that perhaps you don't like. If you think technology is automatically enlightening you, then you don't recognize that the internet, in fact, generally plays on our emotions, and that the rise of the internet is actually correlated, unfortunately, with a decline in human capacity and a decline in human intelligence. And if you haven't noticed this, well, that in itself, unfortunately, raises some questions. Most importantly, maybe, the politics of inevitability always leads to some kind of shock. We realize at a certain point that it's not true, and then we become vulnerable to those politicians who say, look, of course there's no progress, of course there's no future, everything is about us and them, everything is about restoring a past where we were always innocent and they were always guilty. And this is now the dominant form of politics all around the world. To put it a different way, what's happened is we've gone from having one idea of the future, capitalism has to bring democracy, technology has to bring enlightenment, to zero ideas of the future. We no longer talk about the future at all. And of course, in all of this, the fundamental problem is a problem of responsibility. If you think that capitalism has to bring democracy, if larger forces have to bring democracy, then you as a citizen don't have to do anything. If you think that it doesn't matter what you do, there's no future, then again, you have no sense of responsibility. The next place we're moving could be pretty dark. We have a choice between two possibilities. One of them is dark and one of them is actually very inviting and positive. The next thing that could be coming along, in fact, which we already see, is a kind of politics of catastrophe, where the future is there, but the future is only dark. And of course, here I have in mind global warming. One of the problems with the politicians of eternity is that in turning us away from the future, they also turn us away from the reality that there are things in the future that we absolutely have to deal with, and one of them is global warming. If we don't deal with global warming, then a future reappears, but only a negative future, only a dark future. Then we move into a catastrophic mood, which makes democracy, unfortunately, impossible. So that's one alternative. That's one way the politics of time can go. And you could say it's one way that the politics of time is already going. Politicians of eternity tend to be climate change deniers or people who think that climate change is a good thing and are moving us in that direction. Okay, enough of the bad news. There is actually some good news at the end of this, because if it's true that the future is important to democracy, and if it's true that the future is the thing that we have lost, then we can see conceptually what we need to do to get democracy back, or at least one big thing we have to do to get democracy back, and that is to restore a sense of the future. And this is what I call the politics of responsibility. If it's true that the future has gone away for reasons, that means that we can think of policy that might bring a sense of the future back. If it's true that, for example, inequality creates hopelessness, then it would make sense that a rejuvenated welfare state, which brings social mobility, will also bring a sense of the future. If it's true that the internet pins us down and traps us with our emotions, which it does, then revising how social platforms work or just spending less time with the internet can make us more energetic and more alive to various ideas of the future. And if it's true that the fear of climate change keeps people from looking into the future, then aggressive, interesting, innovative steps to address climate can also make us more hopeful. All of those three things are true. This means that there's hope. In fact, there's double or even triple hope, because if we can see our way into the future conceptually with policy, this also means we can imagine that we could do something about the future, make the future a better place. And as soon as we start to think about that, as soon as we start to think, okay, the future could not only be different than the present, it could actually be much better than the present, then we're on our way towards thinking ourselves back towards democracy. Because of course, the things that I'm talking about are not only necessary, they're also generally quite popular. So one can imagine a future, one can imagine ourselves into a future where we care about these things, where we make progress on these things, and then there's a positive feedback where these things then give us a sense that the future is coming again, and that the future might be a good one. In other words, things are horrible, but in a certain respect, they're not as bad as they seem. There really is a future, and getting to that future and making it a good future may not be quite as hard as it seems. The mood that we're in, the politics of eternity, moving into catastrophic time, convinces us that there's nothing we can do, that we're in a rut. But a few small victories, a few changes could convince us again, I think, that democracy is precisely a way forward. Thank you very much.